Today on the BetaFiles, COVID in the classroom. No, we're not going to talk about whether or not children should be going back to school. We're going to talk about my first week back to teaching face-to-face classes and what it was like. I'm not going to be critical, just going to tell you what it was like and where I think education may be headed. So hang on to your diapers, babies. I'm the barber. This is the BetaFiles.
Play the BetaFiles podcast.
Here's the BetaFiles podcast.
How's it going, guys? It has been a while. It's been a week. I think I mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts that we would, once classes got going, I would switch to a once a week thing. We have obviously gotten there. We're back to once a week. Or we have fallen. Yeah, we're back to once a week because the original podcast, the original 10 episodes that we did back in 2018, it was every Friday. So right now it's going to be kind of sporadic until everything kind of settles down. And I'm going to talk about that in a short file that is coming, I promise, probably within 24 hours of this podcast. So if you, and I am going to post it up as a podcast. So talking about the other things, the only one I want to mention is the Optic Poet. We did post a new episode of the Optic Poet to YouTube, but I didn't do it or format it as a podcast because the audio is quite terrible because we did it outside beside of a road. So you hear the traffic a lot. So I decided just to leave it as the video. So if you want to see the latest Optic Poet, you can go over to YouTube and check it out. It is there. It was quite fun. It was an experiment on what we could do outside of a controlled environment like this, where we went to our favorite coffee shop, 83 Custom Coffee on I think it's Eastchester in High Point, or maybe Main Street, but it's right there in downtown High Point. Well, not in downtown, it's kind of on the outskirts of downtown. It's in High Point, okay. It's like 4 blocks away from where the market is, so it's not that far. Excuse me. So we went there. It's where Jay and I usually go to get coffee. So we went there and hung out and did a podcast, and it was kind of cool. So there's that. So check it out if you want to. As far as the other shows, I'm going to deal with those in the short file, and I'm also going to talk about the blog in the short file as well. So just hang tight for that. I promise it's going to come. But just for now, be on the lookout on the podcasts or on the podcast hosts and the YouTube page for when new things are going to pop up. So you can check them out. I will say that the last two, just the beta files themselves, the last 2 episodes that we've done, the Marco Rubio and the John Oliver ones, have garnered a little bit of attention. Now, it's not, thousands or even hundreds of views, but they're actually trending a little bit better than the older videos. So I'm a little optimistic about that, even though it's still very low numbers. But to see an uptick of any kind is always reassuring. So that's cool, and hopefully this one will get some positive movement as well. We shall see. So let's talk about COVID in the classroom. So on Monday, the 17th, I went back to work at Guilford Tech and went into the classroom for the first time since March. I had not been in front of a classroom in quite a while. If you don't know anything about what happened in North Carolina, somewhere around mid-March, and Jay and I actually talk about this in one of the earlier Optic Poets that came out back in May. But about mid-March, they shut us down. What was interesting was they had been telling us since about the third week of April to be ready, right? To go ahead and start preparing to move online. And then I can't remember exactly what was the catalyst, but I know the UNC system was the first system to move in the state of North Carolina, and then the public schools followed them, and then the community colleges followed them. And I'm not saying like each one was waiting for the other one to move. It just happened to fall that way. The universities went first, and then the public schools, the elementary schools, middle schools, and the high schools, they started moving second, right behind UNC, and then we moved. And I don't think the UNC system had anything to do with the elementary schools or the high schools moving. I think it was just the way everything kind of fell into place. But we were the last ones to do anything. They gave us, what was interesting was UNC shut everything down midweek. And basically everything came to a full stop with the universities to let the kids go home. So there was a lot of confusion and a lot of, I don't want to say hysteria, but a lot of excitement in the negative sense of trying to get the kids off campus as quickly as possible. And then, so that was about midweek. And then we got an email in the community at Guilford Tech, which is a community college. We got an email late Friday, or maybe it was about midday Friday, that we would be suspending classes the following week. And then after that, we would be moving online. So, but we were supposed to keep reporting. So we showed back up to work the following week. And it was finally Wednesday afternoon was the day that I went home, and I didn't go back. And again, that was mid-March. I didn't actually go back to my office till mid-June, late June. So it was somewhere between mid and late June that I popped into my office and grabbed a box full of books that I desperately needed at home, because up until that point, the campus had been completely closed down. And then in early July, I started going back to campus because I was helping advise students. So I was working on campus in an advisory role for about a month before classes started back. And then, of course, I finally got to go back into a classroom this past Monday, the 17th. And it was kind of odd because, so each school is, the state has, across all three systems, the state has kind of let the boards decide how they're going to do this, whether it's a county board or a, in the sense of a community college, it's the college board. It's kind of the same way with the universities. The universities are structured completely different than the community colleges are, as far as administration goes. So the state kind of left it up. They gave us parameters, and we got to work within those parameters. So each school is kind of doing this differently. And as I've noted before, I work full-time at Guilford Tech, but I work part-time as an adjunct at North Carolina A&T, which is the HBCU here in Greensboro. And by the way, it's the only HBCU in the nation that is on a federal grant. The land is federal, the federal grant land thing. If you look this up, you'll understand what I'm talking about. In the late 19th century, a law was passed where the federal government subsidized federal lands within each state to allow each state to build typically a technical university. Technical in the sense that it was technical and agricultural and that kind of thing. For each state, and that's why you always have Like you'll have, in the case of North Carolina, you have the University of North Carolina, which was established in 1792, I believe, which is the oldest public institution in the nation. And then you have North Carolina State. North Carolina State is the one with the federal land grant. Well, North Carolina got 2 land grants. Every state was supposed to get 1, but North Carolina got 2. And the second one that we got was for North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, which is A&T. And it's the only HBCU in the nation that has the federal grant, the federal land grant. So that's really cool. I know that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID, but just a cool little piece of history for you as far as A&T goes. But coming back to the COVID thing, so I work at these 2 different institutions, and they are coming at this in 2 uniquely different ways. So with Guilford, and I mentioned in the teaser that I'm not going to complain. This is not to take shots at the schools, because the reality is that we don't know what we're doing, because we've never had to do this before. And one of the things that I told all my students in all my classes this past week was, as frustrated and confused and angry as you feel right now, multiply that by 10, and that's the faculty and staff at these colleges, because we don't know. We don't understand it. We don't get what's happening. It's not because we're stupid. It's because we've never had to do this before. And so the administrations themselves, who've never had to do this before, have kind of had their hands tied behind their backs because of this. Because one of the crucial things that has not happened is the federal government, because they subsidize so many of the student loans and they subsidize so many of the funds that go into these schools, whether it's a community college or a university, they haven't let up on this on attendance for what's known as the census period. And basically what the census period is this the first 10% of the semester. Okay, so the 10% mark. And as long as you're able to keep the amount of students in seats during that 10% period, quote unquote seats, okay, because this goes for online too. If you show that they're actively engaging with the class up to the 10% mark, you get 100% of the funding that you're promised from the federal government. The problem with all this is how to do this while social distancing, while dealing with hybrid classes that were never hybrid before, and hybrid means that it's half online, half face-to-face, and dealing with, again, fully online classes that were never online before, and now we have new curricula moving online to help open up space, physical space in the classrooms. It's a disaster, and the federal government has not eased up on the rules for census for the funding of schools, which to me is absolutely stupid and asinine. But I'm just a teacher, right? So that's what the administrations are having to deal with. So again, I'm not going to bash on the schools because they're doing the best they can. And I feel really bad for the public school instructors for what they're having to deal with, because in my line of work, and I tell my students all this, all the time, I'm in a much different world than someone who's teaching a high school class or a middle school class or an elementary school class. They have very little freedom to move within their curriculums. Their pedagogy is basically set for them, and they have to adapt it to their personalities without getting too far off from the pedagogy itself. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, pedagogy is basically your teaching philosophy. It's the thing that you, like if I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to teach American Lit. Well, for example, my American Lit 1 class I'm teaching this semester, is focused around the creation of what we call the American identity. And so my pedagogy is my philosophy of presenting that and laying it out. And so that's basically what your pedagogy is. It's a very simplified version or definition of pedagogy. But there you go. So they are given their pedagogies. They are told what they have to teach. They are told where they have to get their students as far as skill sets go, where they have to get their students to. They're held to it. There's a certain percentage point they have to make, that kind of thing. So it leaves them very little wiggle room. There's very little that they can do as far as presenting their personality through it. And it's really heavy in the elementary school, and it's not so heavy in the high school, because by the time you get to the high school, what you have is specialized courses. Whereas in elementary school, the teacher's having to teach all the disciplines together. Okay, if that makes sense. So, you don't have an elementary school teacher who's only teaching English. You don't have an elementary school teacher who's only teaching biology or chemistry or algebra, right? The teachers K through 5 are having to teach all of those disciplines together. Okay, and of course it's the rudimentary portions of those disciplines. These are the basics, but they're still having to kind of manage all of that. They're having to manage math, social sciences, language and arts, and that kind of thing. And although you do have some specialized, what the kids call specials, where you have the art teacher who comes in once a week and gives them an art lesson, the music teacher that comes in and gives them a music lesson, and that kind of thing. So how's that different from what I do? Well, I have what's known as SLOs, or student learning outcomes. For the most part, I'm autonomous in that. Well, at Guilford Tech, I'm largely autonomous because I'm given the SLOs, and all I have to do is build a course that equals those SLOs, those student learning outcomes, so that by the time they leave my class, they have those tools. We do track success outcomes at the community college level. We do track where the students are going and where the students are not going. But unlike the elementary school and middle school and high school teachers, who are typically put into a corner of, you have to make these certain percentages or there's going to be consequences, and typically it's a loss of a job or penalized, or put on probation or whatever. At the community college level, if we start to see lagging in these outcomes, then the department that is in control of that discipline, English department for me, the department itself changes the way that we as a group approach that. Okay? Now, if a instructor goes through obviously a long period of constant decline or constantly low outcome percentages, then obviously there will be some kind of consequence for that. What that consequence is depends on the case, depends on the person, depends on the department, depends on the chair, depends on the dean, but typically what happens is, if we see that there are numbers dropping, then the department itself is held accountable, and then we have to fix it, and we have to find ways to get those numbers up as a group. Okay? At the university, it's a little bit different. What you end up doing, it's a little bit different in that with the department, you have, at the university, especially if it's one that has a graduate school, and where the department itself is part of that graduate program, what you end up with are TAs. And what they'll do is they'll implement what's known as pilot programs, and the TAs are given the pilot programs, and the adjuncts are typically given the pilot programs if the TAs, if there are not enough TAs to go around. And what they do is they track those pilot programs, and then they implement what is good, and they don't implement what is bad. The other thing that universities have been doing at the freshman and sophomore levels, where we have what are known as the gateway courses, or the gen ed courses, these are the general education core. What they're doing is they're making cookie cutter style courses so that everybody is engaging in the exact same course. Thus, the outcomes, if done correctly, can be the same. And if the outcomes show some deficiencies, then the department, again, much like at the community college level, the departments will come in and do what they can to correct those deficiencies, whether it's personnel change or rethinking how they measure that outcome or how they actually get to that outcome. So at A&T, this year is the first year of the implementation of a department-wide curriculum where we have a templated class. And so what I have to do is just basically plug into that template. Now, I have some leeway. It's not like the elementary school teachers or the high school teachers where they have very little, where they're very restricted. I'm not as restricted over there, but I still have a lot more autonomy at Guilford Tech in comparison. What's that got to do with COVID? Well, at Guilford Tech, because we have so much autonomy, one of the problems with COVID is that they have several different models of conducting class during the census period that makes everything extremely complicated when you have so much autonomy. Now, I'm not saying that, autonomy is good or bad. The problem is that the structures that they've kind of implemented, and again, it's not their fault. I don't want anybody to think that I'm complaining about Guilford Tech or ragging on the administration, because that's not what I'm trying to do. But the natural problem is when you have several different departments that promote autonomy and are basically just given, here's the list of SLOs, meet them. Do it however you need to, but get there, okay? When you have that kind of attitude and you have that kind of culture, and then you come in during this COVID crisis and you implement specific set ways that you're supposed to deliver this autonomous set of lessons, chaos is going to ensue. And that's what we had this past week. And again, not complaining, just saying this is how it happened, all right? And it's not their fault. Again, they've got their hands tied because they've got federal money on the line that the federal government is refusing to even use their brains to say, okay, there may be exceptions to this. This may be a semester where we kind of lose money because of COVID. I mean, how do you address this crisis without realizing that there's going to be some money lost? It's going to happen, right? You cannot govern 100% of the college level classes across this nation to keep from losing money, right? It's going to happen. And even more so during a crisis like this with the pandemic. So I said all that. I know this is a lot, right? So what happened? What happened, Brian? Get to the juice, right? Get to the meat of this. So here's what happened. So at Guilford Tech, as I said, they gave us several different models to use. And because I teach what are known as traditional classes. Traditional classes are all face-to-face. Okay, but Guilford Tech is a little bit tricky. We have what's known as traditional, and then traditional blended, and then hybrid, and then online. So traditional is 100% face-to-face. In other words, there is no online component. Now, what that means is my students still, in the 100% traditional classes, they still submit all their assignments online. They still submit them digitally. They do that because it's so much easier for me to grade and keep up with all that. Plus, during COVID, nobody really wants to take up handwritten papers, right? Or papers that let's say you printed out at home, you sneezed on it, your dog sneezed on it, your mom sneezed on it, and then you put it in your butt bag and you give it to me and I take it and I get COVID in my office. Nobody wants that, right? So everything I've done all digital submissions since about 2013, 2014. So I've done them for a few years now. Basically, when Guilford Tech introduced the printer card, and I was like, okay, we're done, because that just gives them another excuse to turn something in late, buying them some more time, right? And I'll explain all that maybe some other day. So that's the only thing they do online. Okay, they don't actually do any work online other than just turning the work in a traditional, fully face-to-face class. In a blended class, what happens is that you have to have, I think the number is like 80% face-to-face, or two-thirds of the class, two-thirds of the class is fully face-to-face, and the last third can be online. So it's blended. So there are assignments that they do online through the website that connect to what we're doing in the classroom. That's a blended class. A hybrid class is a class that does half face-to-face, half online. Okay? Completely down the middle, 50-50. What I teach normally is the fully face-to-face, the traditional classes, and the blended classes. Okay? So I have those two. Those are mine. What they did, because you can only have a certain amount of people in a classroom, and the UNC system, now I don't know, because I don't want to quote the community college system, because they're two completely different systems. But the UNC system, their rule is 20% capacity in the auditoriums, 30% capacity in the classroom. Okay? In other words, 20% of the total enrollment for that class can be admitted into the auditorium face-to-face, while 30% in a classroom can be admitted face-to-face. At the community college level, and I'll come back to that when I talk about what happened at A&T. At community college level at Guilford Tech, what they did was they had to go room to room and count the seats and figure out how many students could actually go in there based on the seating capacity with social distancing. Okay? And so what they decided, and they had to, and God bless whoever had to figure this out. Okay? That person needs to get a bonus for because you're talking about hundreds of classes. Okay? Hundreds, not 800. Like we're talking, maybe 400 or 500, 600. There may be over 1,000 classes going on if you count all 7 of the campuses that we have. I mean, it's insane. And they had to go through and figure out, with all the face-to-face classes, how many students could go into which room. Okay. Now again, 7 campuses. That's a lot. That's a lot of rooms. Okay. So God bless whoever had to do that. If you're watching, I doubt you're watching this, but thank you very much. If you are, we appreciate it. You haven't gone unnoticed by a couple of the faculty, and I'm sure more than just myself and Jay have figured this out, and we thank you for it. But so they had to go through and figure all this out, classroom by classroom, section by section. And what they did was they took every one of our classes. First, they adjusted the caps. Now, a cap is how many students can go into a class. Typically, in a composition class, is between 20 and 25. Okay, so what they had to do at Guilford Tech, normally my classes are 25 cap. Okay, that's the maximum number of students that will be admitted into the classroom. 25. So then what they have to do is they have to match room to that cap, which there are, plenty of classrooms across Guilford Tech's Jamestown campus, which is where I teach, that have 25-seat capabilities. Okay? And what they did was they lowered the caps. So 3 of the 4 composition classes that I'm teaching this semester went from 25 to 20. They cut them to 20. And then they split that in 2. And they gave me 2 rooms at the same time. And the plan was that we would the teachers would physically be in one classroom with half their students and broadcast that lecture to the second room where the other half were. Now, considering that because it's a pandemic, logistics are kind of crazy right now. They came up with this solution. They ordered the equipment that they needed. The equipment got in late because, again, logistics are crazy right now because it's a pandemic. They settled on Microsoft Teams. Now, again, I'm not complaining about the school. But at some point, you have to look at, okay, is this contract with Microsoft really that important? So they settled on Teams, which compared to Zoom is a little bit more cumbersome. And unless you've played with Teams a bit, it's a little bit, and you've been using Zoom, as most of us have been doing over the summer, is using Zoom. Then you're switching platforms to Microsoft Teams, where it's Now, to give Guilford Tech credit, over the summer they kept pushing for us to use Teams, and several of us just kind of ignored it because we were in the middle of the summer. We were in the middle of catastrophe. We just stuck with what we knew. So, yeah, we should have probably started playing with Teams. The ones of us who didn't move over to Teams over the summer, we probably should have. But again, I'm not making excuses. Looking at the mess we were going through in the spring and the summer, Zoom was a lot easier to navigate. Zoom was beefing up rather quickly on fixing all their security problems and those kinds of things. And so it seemed, and again, the platform itself is just a little tad bit easier to navigate than Teams. Okay. But they wanted us to use Teams, so to broadcast to the other room. Now, this next part is going to be hard to explain without sounding like I'm bashing on Guilford Tech. So just know I'm not bashing on Guilford Tech. Okay, they tried really hard, and they worked on it, and they fixed a lot of the problems as the week went on. I'm just talking about the first day. The problem with broadcasting from one room to another and not doing it in a closed system is that you're using the internet to broadcast from one room to the other, which means it's going out and then coming back in, leaving the institution and then coming back into the institution. When you do that, and you've got... And Jay and I sat down and counted up. There were 32 classes on the Jamestown campus alone at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. When you have 32 classes broadcasting from one room to the other, you're going to use up the bandwidth. And that's exactly what happened. At 8:03, the internet crashed the first time, and then it crashed again at 8:29. I know because I looked up as soon as it crashed. I looked at my watch and I told my students, I said, "There it goes." It didn't even last 3 minutes, and it was campus wide. The framework just crashed. Now they had it back up pretty quickly. Okay, so I don't want you to think that oh my God, because again it crashed a second time. So. Now, if it crashed again that day, I don't know, because after fighting it for the first half hour that I was there, I said, you know what, I'm going to do something different. And luckily, the other two classes that I had that morning were not split in two, because there are classrooms where they were so big that I could get the scheduled amount of students into them without having to split them. So you still have excuse me, social distancing. Still have 6 feet apart. So, so the first hour was fun. And basically, what I ended up doing for that 8 o'clock class was I took stock for a really quick second. I had one room go ahead and start writing a short paragraph or two about a prompt that I gave them. And then with the other room, I went over the syllabus really quickly, like a 10-minute version. Had them start writing a couple of paragraphs while I bounced to the other room and went over the syllabus with them very quickly. And then went over the couple paragraphs that they had written before, bounced back to the first room, went over their paragraphs, and then sent them on their way. So that was kind of insane and intense. And I did something similar on Wednesday. Or actually, no, Wednesday I used Zoom. So that was the first day. And then the other 2 classes, like I said, went fairly well because I didn't have to split them up. So then Tuesday comes and I had to split both my classes on Thursday. The problem with my early morning Tuesday class was I had 10 students in one room and 2 in the other. And so the 2 that I had in the other room, I had them write their couple paragraphs, and then the 10, I actually ended up sending 2 more over, so I had 4 in one room and 8 in the other. But regardless, I was having to do the exact same thing again that I did on Monday. And then my late morning class, I actually got the technology to work correctly because I used Zoom. I finally decided. Now listen, during all this, I'm still playing with Teams. I'm still trying to get Teams to work because I'm like, well, this is what they want us to do. I'm going to, try and make it work. And eventually by Tuesday, the last class on Tuesday, I decided, you know what, screw it. I'm going to use Zoom. And so that's what I did. I broadcast Zoom. So Wednesday, we get in, and I'm using Zoom, and in the 8 o'clock class, and then the other 2 classes went fine. Still just stressing out. Now, during all of this, well, I'll come to that in a minute. So, basically, by Friday of the first week of class at Guilford Tech, I'd gotten through the week by using a few tips and tricks to get around some of the protocols so I could still make census. Because all of this goes back to what I was talking about before. I have to be able to count the students during the 10% period so that we get the funding for my classes. Okay? So by Friday, the end of the week, it was done. It was, I had, again, figured out a few tips and tricks to get around it. And I went ahead and split 3 of my 5 classes at Guilford Tech into 2 groups. One that will meet, so on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday thing, there'll be one group on Monday that will meet face-to-face. And then the other group will watch a video that I will post. And then Wednesday, the second group will meet, and the group that met on Monday will watch a video that I will post. And then on Friday, everybody gets a lecture. And that actually fits into the blended mold because they're getting 2/3 of the lecture in class. It works. So it's still a blended class. And then my 2 Tuesday, Thursday classes, I just split down the middle, and I don't have to worry about a third lesson because on Tuesdays and Thursdays you only have 2 lessons per week. And again, it's one group meets on Tuesday, the second group meets on Thursday. Oh, excuse me. Both groups get videos on the opposite days. So that's Guilford Tech. Now, during all of this, remember, I work at A&T too. A&T's classes started Wednesday. So, here's what's going on with A&T. While all that's happening, this is the second portion of my life during this week. So Monday morning, news hits that Chapel Hill is sending everybody home because they've had like 5 or 6 different mini outbreaks in the dorms. So they're sending the kids home. There's rumors about ECU. By, I think it's Wednesday morning, Appalachian had just completely shut down the football program. So it's insane, right? It was crazy. And I kept watching. I'm like, what's A&T going to do? And so now again, classes started Wednesday. So late Tuesday, we get a email from the chancellor at A&T that basically said the UNC system has not shut down, just Chapel Hill. And they haven't shut down, they've just moved everything online. So it's not fair to say shut down. They just moved everything online to get these kids out, right? So, excuse me. His letter on Tuesday was basically saying, here at A&T, we're moving forward as planned. Now, A&T has done something similar to Guilford Tech in that they gave us several different options to teach the classes. Well, actually, they didn't give us options. This is what your class is. Moved a lot of stuff online, and they did that to open up, again, physical space on campus. And then they split the classes in half before we had to. And from day one, you had basically the model that I'm using at Guilford Tech about the on-off, right? So, again, I'm not complaining about either one of the schools. They're doing the best they can. Okay? But they split the classes. They tell the students what groups they're in. Somewhere along the way, I missed one sentence in one of the dozens of emails I've gotten over the past 2 weeks. But what I keep getting told is, check your roster. Your roster will be split. Okay. No problem. On top of all this, they kept doing minor changes to what we were supposed to do for the classroom, for the syllabi, for the program, etc., which is fine. That's normal. But what's abnormal about it in this case is because the nature of COVID, everything has come together kind of crazy at the last minute. Again, nobody's fault. It's the nature of what's happening. I mean, you can't really just pin it on somebody and say you fell down on the job. Because there have been a lot of problems at both schools that really have nothing to do with the people, and it has everything to do with the fact that the culture of the college, the system itself, is just trying to figure this out, which is fine, and what you got to do is you got to take a deep breath and realize, like I told my students, if it's frustrating for me, imagine the next rung up, right? So it's probably, again, 10 times as bad. So you gotta think of it that way. And you gotta think, I also told my students, you gotta think of, right now the world is an open AA meeting. You have to take it one day at a time, right? So you can't get frustrated and you can't expect everything to go right tomorrow. Worry about today, right? And get through today as best you can. So Wednesday, or Thursday. Thursday was my first class. I started classes on Wednesday. And again, I missed one little part of one line of the dozens of emails I've been getting from A&T over the past few weeks. So I go online and I check my rosters. And my rosters are exactly the way they had been. They hadn't split them. I'm like, well, okay. So Thursday I show up about an hour and a half early just to check, because you never know. Right? And this kind of craziness, you want to make sure that you've got everything you need. So I go to my classroom that I'm supposed to be, and I've never taught in this particular classroom before. So I went to check. I've been at A&T for 6 years, I think. And so I go and check my classroom. And it says on the board, capacity 26. I have 24 students. Good to go. Well, I keep getting emails from students asking, my thing says it's virtual. Is this an online class? I said, no, this is face-to-face. So I finally go up to the English department and talk to the AA there and ask her, I'm like, is there something I'm missing about this class? She said, well, they're supposed to split it. Did you check your roster? I was like, yes. And I pulled up my roster on my tablet and showed her my roster. It's not been split in that program. And she didn't catch it either, and so I can't blame her for it or anything. I can't really blame anybody for it other than the fact that I somehow missed this one stupid sentence. So I go and I sit down, and I send out an email to all my students and tell them, I'm very sorry. For those of you who've emailed me, I'm sorry for the confusion. If it says virtual, you stay. Right? Stay behind. If you are face-to-face for today, you come to class, we'll figure it out. I'll set up the Zoom meeting. So I go into my Zoom account through A&T because each institution back in the spring set up separate accounts. Guilford Tech let theirs lapse, and we ended up with Microsoft Teams. Okay? I've already gone through all that. A&T set it up and then left it. Well, here's the problem with adjuncts, like myself at A&T. Over the summer, they purge everything. And then you have to reinstate everything for the adjuncts again in the fall. And this is neither good or bad. It's just, this is what they do, okay? So, guess what got purged? Well, my Zoom account. So, when I went on, and here's the thing about the free Zoom account, you can only broadcast to 3 people for 45 minutes. Well, I've got, 24 students. Half of those, or half of 24 is 12. You can imagine. That's 4 times the amount that Zoom is going to let me have, okay? So I'm freaking out, and so I went back to the AA, and she gave me the name of the lady who's in charge of, who's one of her jobs is to deal with the Zoom thing. So I contacted her and said, hey, I need you to reinstate my Zoom. She did it. She had my Zoom. Now, she didn't have it in time for me to teach. So what I did was send out a second email and said, hey, I'm going to do a quick online lecture when I get home. And we'll figure it out. And just look for that. I'll send you the link. And I did by, I think by 6 o'clock that night, I had the link to them. I had the lecture for them so they could see it. And they could get caught up. So I was still on track on the first day. And of course, by probably about 4:45, I think, that day she had my Zoom stuff reinstated. So I was able to use Zoom on Friday and broadcast out to more than 3 people for 45 minutes. God bless enterprise, right? God bless corporate America. So here's how it's going to play out for A&T for the rest of the semester as I'm teaching as I'm lecturing in the classroom. And this was fun too. Friday I got a really good taste of how this is going to go down. So I'm teaching and broadcasting live through Zoom to the rest of my students. And why it's going to be fun, why I sarcastically said it's going to be fun, because students being students, even when it's online and all they have to do is open it, they're still late. And I was, for the first 20 minutes, going back and forth to the podium to admit students into the Zoom classroom while I'm trying to talk to the students who are physically in front of me. That is COVID in the classroom. Now, that is not that doesn't at all diminish what happened to any of the other instructors. I'm sure there are even better horror stories from the first week of class. But I will say this: I only had to, out of the, I think I counted it as 172 students starting out. Out of the 172 students that I had this past week, I only had to tell one to put their mask on, and it was only because she went to go get a drink, and she had forgot to put it back up after she had taken her drink, and so I just had to tell her. That's pretty good. I'm actually pretty proud of that one. The other thing is, the first day, I had to explain to them that every time you walk to a classroom, we have buckets of hand wipes in each classroom, and I have to tell them, grab a wipe down your table, and I'm having to wipe down the computers and the desk at the front where I work. And by Friday, it was second nature already for those kids. They were walking in, and as soon as they walked in, every class that I had, every classroom, they're grabbing a wipe and wiping things down. So as far as sanitation and mask and all that, don't think we're going to have a problem with it this semester. I don't think we're going to have that kind of issue. And it's already become, like I said, by Friday, it was already second nature to a lot of them. There were a couple that I had to remind. But again, out of 172, 173 students, somewhere in there, it's not bad. One or two, one to put their mask on. So that is COVID in the classroom. That was my first week back. I hope you learned something, or you got a good laugh out of it, or whatever. So there you go. That's the BetaFiles for this week. Next week we'll get back on track on. I still want to talk about the picket fence, because one of the things I find interesting in American history is the institution and creation of suburbia following World War II, because it's the period following the period that I studied for my master's, and to see how it shifts is very interesting to me. And the basically the Leave It to Beaver myth, right? The 2-story colonial house with a picket fence in the front yard. So picket fence, what happened? Will it be the next BetaFiles? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'll do another one on COVID and tell you how week 2 went. I haven't really got to talk about my kids and what they had to go through this week, so we'll see. I will say this: both my kids that are still in public school are going to be doing everything online for the first 9 weeks. So the first quarter is all online, and then they're hoping it'll go to a hybrid where they go 3 on, 3 off. But we'll see. See how it plays out. It's all about the numbers. What are the numbers doing? The good thing is, and I showed this to my wife this morning, since mid-July was the ultimate peak in number of cases, and the cases have slowly been coming down. So if you go to the New York Times, on their front page, they have a graph that updates daily. And you can see, you pull up the graph and you can see how it went way up in mid-July, and now it's on the backhand side. We're coming down. So we'll see how it plays out. Okay. All right. Make it a great day. Make sure to be kind to one another. It's getting angrier out there. It's so angry out there that the church that Lauren and I follow did an entire sermon this week on anger. It's getting bad out there. Be kind to one another. There's no reason to be this angry at each other. We're doing the best we can. Be frustrated, but just cap it off at frustration. Anger is dangerous. So be kind to one another. Be healthy, be safe, be smart, and remember that if the sun comes up, there's always opportunity. So take it. I'm the barber. This has been the BetaFiles.